On a patch of remote rangeland in northern Arizona, a strange procession delivers prairie dogs to a new home.
There you go.
It's the final chapter in a rescue mission, one that never would have happened without months of volunteer work and the groundbreaking animal research done by Kon Slobodchikov.
Everybody should be aware of this. Some of the burrows are plugged.
Yeah.
Slobodchikov is a biologist who specializes in prairie dogs. That's one reason he's on hand as these city prairie dogs are transplanted to an abandoned rural colony.
Whoa!
Some seem a little upset with their new country surroundings.
The environment is so different from what they're used to that they'd probably be saying, what happened? Where are we?
And if anyone knows what prairie dogs are saying, it's Kon Slobodchikov. For 13 years, he studied prairie dogs and their language at this colony in Flagstaff, Arizona.
Probably hundreds of days, thousands and thousands of hours. So it is very much like a second home.
He recorded and analyzed countless hours of sound and came to the scientific conclusion that prairie dogs talk in sentences.
They have a fairly complex language, probably the most sophisticated natural language that anybody has decoded for an animal species. And I'm not saying here that these prairie dogs can say Hamlet's soliloquy, but it does show that there's a quantitative difference, but not a qualitative difference between human language and prairie dog language.
It's a bond between us and them that will be instrumental in saving the lives of these prairie dogs. For more than a decade, Slobodchikov has been unraveling prairie dog language in this cramped room at Northern Arizona State University.
The first one is a coyote call.
The recorded calls are fed into a sophisticated computer program that allows him to see what the prairie dogs are saying.
We know that there's a word for coyote, human, and this is a dog call, a domestic dog, which still continues to amaze me that they can tell the difference between a domestic dog and a coyote.
The experiments usually involve sending threats, like people with various types of clothing or equipment, through the prairie dog community and analyzing how the warning calls change.
This particular call comes from our white lab coat experiment, which is what you filmed Jennifer walking through. If we had colors in there like blue and yellow, it would be reflected in fluctuations in here. When I first started doing this, I thought of these as word-like things, human. Once I realized that there were adjective-like things going on in there, this is more like human wearing white lab coats, tall and thin, walking slowly. All in that little burst.
Slobodchikov is convinced that prairie dogs have an impressive vocabulary, with different calls to describe every detail of just about every visitor that might wander through their colony.
We have deer and elk coming through, and occasional cows, and they have different calls for deer and elk and cows.
Do they have a call for a grater?
Not for a grater, as far as I know.
Perhaps they should have.
But perhaps they should.
That might have been helpful last Thanksgiving, if any of the prairie dogs had been awake when the graders arrived. The machine spread a thick layer of dirt over a colony of hibernating prairie dogs in a park just across the street from Desiree Johnson's place.
And it was graded over so many times that it compacted nearly to the consistency of asphalt. And the prairie dogs were hibernating. Hopefully the prairie dogs will be ready for breakfast tomorrow.
Johnson visits the colony at Fox Glen Park often. She knew the city wanted to build soccer fields here, so she and a group of volunteers were making plans to move the prairie dogs. Now, it was too late for at least half the colony.
If they could dig out, they would use all of their winter fat that they needed for hibernation and then die, or they would suffocate.
Never thought that it would suffocate hundreds of them.
Rita Johnson is a city councilor in Flagstaff. She says the grading work simply reflected the general public attitude towards prairie dogs.
By and large, people see prairie dogs as a pest. They've been viewed as a nuisance. They left little mounds that your horse would trip in, and they were seen as a pest.
It's an old story. When prairie dogs get in the way, people get rid of them.
In the millennia before the arrival of the white man, prairie dog communities like this one dominated the Great Plains. They built cities far larger than we have. One, in Texas, had a population of 400 million. It's believed as many as 5 billion prairie dogs lived in North America. Now, perhaps 2% remain. Of the 5 major species, 1 is endangered, 2 are threatened, and the other 2 are on the brink. And all because of pressure from people.
In this case, the people pressure has led to eviction rather than extermination, partly because of complaints from people like Desiree Johnson, and partly because of Con Slobodjikov's research.
Con's work that suggests that they have a conversation with one another, that it's a whole family entity, it certainly makes one feel more of a connection and more of a sympathy or an empathy for the prairie dogs. You don't see them anymore as little rats. You see them as something closer to dogs. I think Con's work has had a major impact on the debate. I think it's moved the Fish and Game and the city to agree that they should relocate the prairie dogs as opposed to simply exterminate them.
Path area, everything that's there seems related to me.
Okay.
And
you're talking about the family groups, right?
The family group, right.
The volunteers moved into high gear, putting out traps baited with sunflower seeds weeks before the planned move. The idea was to get the prairie dogs accustomed to feeding inside the metal cages.
It does appear to be working out. An excited volunteer called me to let me know that she saw 3 prairie dogs nudging, elbowing each other to try to get into one cage at the same time.
We have to be here by 5?
Probably.
I can do
5:30.
that. I'm a morning person.
Are you?
The volunteers are a dedicated bunch, in part because they love animals, in part because of Slobodjikov's research.
It's played a tremendous role. It helps us have something that we feel is a little more scientific, a little more objective than just our own subjective connection that we feel.
Desiree Johnson has no trouble believing prairie dogs are thinking creatures, even though the professor is careful about how he phrases his view.
They actually probably can think. They probably can have some measure of consciousness about themselves and about what's going on around them.
Now you say they probably can think. Where does the probably come from?
The probably comes from scientific caution, in the sense that in science we really can't definitively prove anything. And ultimately, from a scientific standpoint, I can't prove that you think, and you can't prove that I think. And so that's where the probably comes from.
In about 15 or 20 minutes, we'll all take a walk and start picking up prairie dogs. But first,
It's moving day for the prairie dogs of Fox Glen Park. Officers from the State Fish and Game Department supervise the volunteers.
Don't worry.
What number are we on, Con?
19.
19.
This should be 20, right?
Yeah.
It's a successful morning. More than 3 dozen prairie dogs, almost half the number believed to have survived the grading work, wait anxiously inside the traps.
He's probably not too bad.
You're okay, honey.
They would probably be expressing dismay and unhappiness at being exposed to so much disturbance and so much activity.
Slobodjikov can sympathize with those feelings. Like these prairie dogs, there's no longer room for him and his research in Flagstaff.
Lots of dogs get walked along here. Lots of people ride bikes. Lots of joggers come through here.
His research colony is a stone's throw from the park where the prairie dogs were buried, and the city has just built a trail connecting 2 neighborhoods right through the middle of it.
There is really nothing that we can do here. There is just too much disturbance here. So pretty much at this point I'm going to take the blind down and pull up the stakes.
And start over.
That new start will come on rangeland 50 kilometers north of Flagstaff. not far from the abandoned prairie dog colony where the Fox Glen animals are released.
Go on.
Prairie dog.
It's a day the volunteers have worked hard for.
Oh, those are the two. What we should be doing is staying connected with the natural world. We are the natural world. And so my convictions are even stronger than before the project was started.
But it's a bittersweet day for the professor.
It's certainly a defeat in terms of seeing the prairie dogs in the city lose ground.
All
right.
His research has been dealt a serious blow. Getting started again so far from the university will be difficult and expensive.
This one for you.
But the fact there are so many willing hands and a new home offered by an old ranching family that doesn't want its gesture publicized is encouraging.
Here are people who are willing to give up their time to help out other animals that in a previous time or by other people would have just simply been slaughtered.
Still, this project and Slobodchikov's work is not just about prairie dogs. It's about how people relate to animals and how that relationship might change if enough people believe animals can think and communicate.
But if prairie dogs are sentient, what else is?
Probably most other animals are sentient, perhaps even including insects.
And we just don't know it.
And we just don't know it. And we have no way at this point of proving it. We think that currently that they're as expendable as test tubes, but what if they're not? What if each one of them is a conscious being? Then it really puts a lot of scientists into an ethical dilemma. My scientific colleagues understand at some level that this is potentially shaking up the whole order.
In the animal kingdom, these are the ultimate underdogs. Their contribution to the natural world has never been enough to earn them respect. Perhaps their ability to talk about that natural world in a way that people are beginning to understand will change that.
Somebody have a blessing?
May your territories be spacious and distinct.
Okay, buddy.
He's hanging on for dear life.
For Country Canada, I'm Jim McQuarrie in northern Arizona.